This silhouette is all that's left of one of the MLB's former stadiums. Without this sign located outside of a Lowe's, you wouldn't even know that this site was once home to Major League Baseball. The stadium that was once here started one of the most sorrowful tales in baseball, one covered in depth by John Boyce at Secret Base. But there is much more to the story of this ballpark than just a metal cutout. Today, we'll learn about the tragedy of Sick Stadium, how it came about, its rise to the big leagues, and its ultimate tragic fate. The saddest baseball stadium of all time is coming up right after this. Before Sick Stadium was erected, the site was previously occupied by another modest ballpark by the name of Dugdale Field. Dugdale was tragically burned to the ground by an arsonist in 1932, and for 6 years the lot remained empty. Sick Stadium was built in 1938, and it only cost $350,000 to build. That's roughly $6.5 million today. You'll see why it was so cheap later. Emil Sick, a former brewer and industrialist, was able to purchase the minor league team and build the park and rename the Seattle Indians to the Seattle Rainiers after his Rainier Brewery, his business. The stadium was beer heavy. Sick was able to market Rainier beer on the walls, on the radio, and in the concession stands. So to him, the stadium was more of an enterprise than it was reflective of his love for baseball, and that was okay. The new stadium was a sign of economic turnaround after the Great Depression and a symbol of growth in Seattle. However, from an execution standpoint, Sick Stadium was not built to last. The major problem was the stadium was built out of wood. It made for a beautiful, lush, old-timey aesthetic, but if you know anything about Seattle's climate, that was going to be a problem. Wood doesn't exactly do well with precipitation, and the natural grass on the field flooded in the winter. The seats became soggy in the rain, the parking lot was small, and the stadium wasn't big enough for Major League Baseball, with an original capacity of just 11,000 fans. But for minor league baseball, it was enough. The Rainiers played in 6 until 1968, and the Steelheads of the Negro Leagues made a quick layover in 1946. Then in 1969, somehow the big leagues came calling, but there were still major problems on the horizon. Seattle was a booming hub in the Pacific Northwest, and pro sports leagues were beginning to notice the city in the 60s. Seattle had hosted the World's Fair in 1962, a major success that prompted the construction of the Space Needle. And the arrival of Boeing advanced the airline industry in what had always been a shipbuilding town. Former Rainiers pitcher and GM Dewey Soriano founded the Seattle Pilots in the late 60s, and the MLB surprisingly announced their first season would be in 1969. Nice. Originally, they weren't supposed to play until 1971, but the arrival of the Royals to Kansas City meant that the schedule was unbalanced for 1969. And thus the Pilots were fast-tracked into existence and stuck with a dilapidated home. Once a piece of beautiful architecture, Six was 31 years old and already unfit for baseball in general in 1969. In fact, Seattle knew this and had already purchased it 4 years prior, planning to demolish it to make way for a proposed freeway. The MLB approved its use only for a temporary basis until they were able to find a dome stadium. But they didn't know just how disastrous the first season would be in 6. It would probably be the worst one of all time. For starters, the scoreboard wasn't even ready for use until the night before the opener. It was agreed to expand the stadium to 30,000 seats, but only 17,000 were ready for opening day. Before a major league game had even been played there, the park became a money pit for the city of Seattle, who was dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get it up to code, and to no avail. The stadium finally expanded to 25,000 seats in June, most of them totally obstructed, but maybe that was a blessing in disguise because the Pilots were unwatchable by the end of the summer. Seattle was totally out of the playoff picture come July, a month where they went 9-20, followed by a 6-22 stretch in August. There were no camera pits at the field level, meaning that photographers were forced to set up their equipment in the awkward and dangerous spots above the field. The visiting announcers couldn't see the third baseline from their boots, so they had to set up a mirror just to see a reflection of any ball that was pulled left of the shortstop. It became clear the Pilots couldn't even make a stopover in 6 while their permanent home was in construction. And somehow, it still gets worse. During most games with an average attendance, the stadium lost water pressure by the 7th inning, and toilets had trouble flushing. The only thing that stunk worse than the players were the pee-soaked hands of the fans and the restrooms, which featured unflushed emergency chili dog evacuations. Teams couldn't even shower in the locker room after the game. Imagine losing to a team in a shithole and then not being able to take a warm shower after. In the big leagues, no less. The 1969 season came to an unceremonious close. The Pilots finished their inaugural campaign with a record of 64-98, a full 33 games out of first place. Fans weren't even showing up to see the first pro baseball team in the region. Seattle finished 20th out of 24th in attendance, and as few as 2,000 fans showed up for just their 17th game of the season. No one wanted to spend a day at 6. And the MLB wasn't too keen to let the dying park tarnish their image for another year. The team had already lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in just a single season, but Seattle tried to do a quick remodel, proposing to pull over $1 million out of an emergency fund to make 6 game-worthy for the 1970 season, but the league wasn't having it. Their proposed stadium would take a few more years to be ready, but a petition by stadium opponents had ground the progress to a halt. Soriano pulled the plug and sold the team for $10 million to a car salesman by the name of Bud Selig, who immediately moved the team to Milwaukee. The Pilots were renamed the Brewers, and they've spent the last half-century there and not won a World Series. 6 Stadium, or the inability to overhaul 6, directly contributed to the only modern baseball team going one and done. A blip on the timeline of the history of baseball. And now we'll learn of the sad fate of 6 Stadium. As for the stadium itself, it hung on for dear life after the MLB left. Legendary musicians played 2 of the last shows of their lives in 6 in 1970. On July 5th, Janis Joplin played a set alongside Steve Miller. 3 months later, Joplin would die of a heroin overdose. 21 days after Joplin's show, Jimi Hendrix, a Seattle native, would also play 6. He would die less than 2 months later. It seems 6 Stadium was one of the last stops for 2 members of the 27 Club. Aside from visits from doomed music icons, there were still some baseball games played during the final years of 6. The minor leagues played their games there from 1972 to 1976, though fans claimed it wasn't the same, having once seen the park occupied by major league talent on a nightly basis. By 1978, with the Kingdome built and Seattle now hosting both an NFL team and the Seattle Mariners, 6 Stadium was now sadly reduced to target practice for pigeons, and was finally stripped of parts and eventually demolished in 1979, though it really died 15 years earlier alongside its owner, Emil Sick. Emil Sick died in 1964, 5 full years before the Pilots called it their temporary home. Ownership of the stadium was transferred to a few of his family members, and thus 6 with the singular possessive apostrophe became 6 to show plural possession. And like most prizes inherited from parent to child, the stadium wasn't maintained with the same love and care as it was when the original owner was still around. It was no longer a family stadium. It was sold to the city, and knowing that their eventual goal was to turn a once beautiful landmark into just another stretch of freeway, it wasn't granted the care it needed and deserved. That, combined with the devastating depression that hit Seattle in the late 60s, meant that the stadium wasn't really given a chance to be restored to its former glory. In 1992, Eagle Hardwood and Garden was built on the ancient Pilot burial ground. And like most hardware stores, it became a Lowe's. And on those Lowe's grounds lies the solitary reminder that, once upon a time, the plumbing section was home plate. Well, isn't that sad? Fitting irony. I'm 5 Points Vids, and you made it to my next video.